Hello and welcome back to this damn foot idealistic crusade. This video will be the first in a series detailing my James Bond book collection, so that means starting back where it all began with Ian Fleming and Casino Royale. So this video will in turn deal entirely with my Fleming editions, which is a variety of US original paperback and hardcovers, later printings, and some British editions as well. It's by no means a complete collection, and I've never tried to strive particularly for one series over another, trying to complete a run. It'd be nice to do so, but I just usually wind up picking up extra odds and ends when I find inexpensive copies in used bookshops or on eBay or other places, with the Holy Grail being having original first edition UK Jonathan Cape for hardcover editions. But of course, the expense of doing such a thing is rather a long ways off, which of course makes it said Holy Grail for all Bond book collectors and Fleming fans. But to give you a little personal history, I have been doing this for quite some time and have always more Bond editions than I originally realized when I go to my shelf. But where I started, unfortunately, I grew up primarily in the 1990s when the Fleming novels had essentially fallen out of print. And this was really before the age of the internet and being able to easily order whatever book you want on eBay or online book ordering from other retailers. So the last print run had been in the 1980s here in the U.S. With Berkeley and Charter when they were doing the John Gardner novels. And then while the continuation novels did go on in the 90s, going from Gardner into Raymond Benson's tenure, the Fleming novels were not being reprinted. So they didn't get reprinted until the lovely Penguin series in 2002, which by that point in time I had gotten the novels in used editions and then stupidly said, oh, I don't need to get these with the super cool covers because I'm a broke 12 and 13-year-old, I've got the books already, and now I regret it because they did reuse the UK text and they had the gorgeous matching covers, and now I really wish I had gotten those. But where I started was with two particular Fleming books, and this is what introduced me to the world of the book Bond, and I started reading these until they fell apart, and I would search bookstores everywhere, and of course regular bookstores for new copies, just in case somebody ever reprinted them. And this is what turned me on to the continuation novels, because I would see not Fleming originals, but I would see various Gardner editions, and then the Raymond Benson novels started coming out, and that's how I found out about them, looking for other books I was missing. And then lo and behold, there were new books. So it was fun discovering them that way. But how I started was with two completely different Fleming originals. So I have them here, and again, they are the worst for wear because I read them until they started to fall apart. I still, open them up and flip through them. But I started with Goldfinger here in a Charter 1980s reprint. This I got at a library book sale for a whole dime. And of course, it has the unfortunate X in Sharpie on the cover, and the spine is starting to go on the sides. But it's held up over the years, and this was the first Bond novel I ever read, and it was this particular copy. And of course, 10-year-old, 11-year-old me was, actually, I think I may have been 9 or 10 when I first read this, and it just blew my mind. And that was combined with, I found on my grandmother's bookshelf, she always had a shelf full of old romance novels and things that seemed to just gather dust among some old pictorial history books. But I happened to notice a extra box with this sticking out of it, and I was like, wait, that can't be what I think it is. And it was, lo and behold, the U.S. first edition of Octopussy and the Living Daylights. Of course, by now, the dust jacket is far more worn because I immediately begged and pleaded to let me have this one, and proceeded to read it then and there that day. I think more than once, simply because I was so excited, and it didn't matter that it was short stories. It was more of the book Bond. And of course, the first time I was confronted with this iconic shot of Fleming with his cigarette and favorite cigarette holder. So it was these two volumes. So it was Goldfinger for the novels and Octopussy and the Living Daylights for the short stories that got me hooked on the book Bond, and really were the eye-opener I needed, that the book Bond was a wholly different world. And by going back to the source of things and learning Fleming's prose and his style and his wit. It was a real eye opener to the world at large for a precocious young 10-year-old Bond fanatic, and it enriched my appreciation of the films. And the films that were more serious, I could then start to link better the Fleming elements that were shared, and so it became a sort of pathway for me to go along, because I was just finding the various novels where I could, and unfortunately I didn't get to read them in order, but finding those editions, I think, is what got me hooked on the spirit of collecting the various Bond editions. So this is where it all started for me, and of course these are just two of my many different Fleming editions. Again, this is by no means a complete thing. It'd be great to have a complete collection, but mine is just tiny compared to some of the truly amazing collections that you can see pictures of on various Bond fan groups, or the Literary Bond has a number of Facebook groups or collectors groups, and you can see people who have the Jonathan Cape original British first edition Fleming titles with the Richard Chopping dust jackets, or all the various Signet printings of the various runs of Signet paperbacks, all the US first editions, things like that. So that's what I aspire to, but this is merely just me going over all the editions I have, which again is far more than I realized. So I've had to break this up into several sections. So again, this will be simply on my Fleming editions. So with that, let's go off to the table for a closer examination, where we enter a world where the scent and sweat and smoke of a casino are nauseating at 3 a.m. So we, of course, will start at the beginning and go book by book, starting with where everything began, with Fleming's original Casino Royale. Here are my 5 particular paperback volumes, and it's a range of different series of various printing runs and things. Again, as I said in the introduction, I've never gone to try and complete a specific series. My original goal growing up was to just get all the novels and then eventually get them in both paperback and hardback forms where available, because I really enjoy the various cover designs, and I always like having a paperback to take on the go. Plus, I'm a paperback man at heart anyway. So over the years, I've actually gotten a number of different Casino Royale editions, as we have here, and I've been lucky enough to get 2 original British Pan paperbacks from the different runs. So we'll start with the earliest Pan I have. This is from, there are different names for the various Pan series, but this is from the Great Pan run with the yellow actual box for the title and author credit, the very pulp detective novel or pulp crime novel feel to the cover, which looks beautiful, and of course the yellow banner on the bottom with the original style 007 logo that was originally developed in Britain around the time of Dr. No, where you had the 007 and gun, but instead of it being the iconic logo we know now, where the 7 is the handle of the gun, of course the gun was actually on the 007 with the bullets on top of it. So, of course, if you know Pan books, they're all a particular size and shape, and it's really rare to stumble across these, particularly in U.S. used bookstores. And, of course, they usually carry a really nice price premium point because, of course, they're highly collectible and they're only getting more and more scarce. So I've been very delighted that I've been able to find some really nice examples like this for not too terribly high a price, but they usually do have a little bit of wear and tear. This one, of course, has already, as you can see, some wear, and the spine is creased a bit sideways. But I was just happy to find a very early edition, early in terms of the Pan paperbacks. This one is actually a 10th printing from about 1962 as it's credited. This paperback, in terms of the actual design layout, is presumably from around 1961 anyway. There you can see the printing dates. And the other thing with the Pan paperbacks, particularly the older ones, they do have a tendency for the pages to already start to have a bit of significant browning, as you can see here. So that's another reason why it's very difficult to get Pan paperbacks in really nice shape in this day and age. And of course, here in the U.S., they all would have had to have been imported or brought over by somebody coming over from the U.K. into the United States, because here we primarily had the Signet editions. Now, here, my second pan copy. This is the much easier to find, much more iconic uniform series that started really around the mid 60s. So they eventually phased this style out and then published the entire Bond series in this style of design with the black James Bond logo, the very stylized and simplistic, almost minimalist in a way, I guess you could say, cover design with a central image tied to the story and a very strikingly done, again, minimalist image over a very stark colored background. These, in a lot of ways, have become iconic in their own right, with some covers being absolutely brilliant and others being, they're tied into the story, but they don't quite grab you. This one, it's a bit simple, but of course you have the cards and the check from the actual casino on what is, it's green, but it's seemingly the green baize felt of the card table. So it makes sense and it draws you in. Again, it's a little bit minimalist, but I myself really do love these covers, and so happy I finally now have a few of them. Again, they were printed in better quantities, and they hold up a little bit better because they are a few years newer and are, of course, more plentiful than the older pan paperbacks. So you are much more able to find or maybe complete a set of this particular style of the pan UK paperbacks than you are, say, trying to complete all of the earlier ones. I'll show you the spine. Again, there is a little bit of spine bending, as you can see there, but not as bad as my earlier copy. I really love the rear with the very large Fleming photograph and the red on the background. It looks very classy. There's a little bit of browning on the pages, but nowhere near as bad as the older pan, the great pan paperback, I should say. As you can see, already by mid to late 1963, when this was supposedly published, they were up to the 15th printing. Of course, everything else is the same in terms of the text block and everything compared to the previous Pan edition, but of course it's much easier to get this particular series of Pan paperbacks. Now we come to my personal favorite and the copy I still read every year. This is the copy I had growing up, and when I think of the novel, this is the version I always think of. That is, of course, the iconic yellow-jacketed US Signet paperback from the 1960s with their traditional, again, very famous cover design with the very bold colored background, the James Bond thriller tag down the side, Fleming's name really large in black, and then the very small but very atmospheric little illustration that really captures the imagination, even though it's very small. And of course, because it's placed between Fleming's name and the title, it sort of is a mini encapsulation of a particular point in each story. And so these Signet paperbacks are very iconic in a number of different ways. And for me, outside of the original extremely expensive Richard Chopping original jackets for the original UK Jonathan Cape hardbacks, this is what I think of when I think of Fleming's Bond and the James Bond of the novels. I always think of the US Signet paperbacks and their red-edged pages and their very bold covers. So this one is a later printing, obviously, because they had already added the little 007 paper logo in the corner. Original Signet paperbacks will not have this, and eventually they started adding this. I believe pretty much all of the Signet paperbacks got this in some shape or fashion for the majority of the novels, and this just basically indicates that you have a later Signet paperback printing. Of course, I suppose it's supposed to mean that you're looking through secret files and then you see 007 at the top of one of the sheets because, if it was, actually turning the pages of a book, you would think this would be over here, but that would wreck the James Bond thriller banner on the side. The other thing with the Signet paperbacks that you do have to be very careful about is you can see there's some, it's not staining, but you can see where the color, the yellow has sort of faded off. These covers are very they have this tendency to want to stick to everything, but particularly they always want to stick to your hands. So if you have not even very oily hands, but they always want to stick to your fingers when you're reading them. That's just something I got used to growing up, and so that is why it's very uncommon to find any of these in absolutely perfect shape, because usually the covers will have at least faded somewhat over time. What I also have always loved is that they had beautiful, matching, simplistic, but yet eye-catching spines. So they all have the black Signet logo at the top, the title, Fleming's name in a color, and then the white spines. So when you have all of them on the shelf and they all have good spines and aren't wrecked with creasing and such, it makes a beautiful matching set for the majority of the novels. And then the rear, a very simple design, but very eye-catching, I think, due to the usage of color, the alternating between color and black of the various titles, and then on a white background. And of course, you can also differentiate early copies versus later copies, because early copies have a earlier picture of Fleming looking dashing with a revolver and a bow tie. And of course, by the point of the later printings, they switched to this photo, which was used in the hardcover of Octopussy and the Living Daylights, and of course has been updated to announce Fleming's death. So of course that's an easy way to tell if you have an early or a later printing, if the fact that Fleming is still listed as being alive on the back of the book. Of course it's a little morbid, and given Fleming's sense of humor, I'm sure that would amuse him. But that's of course the easiest way to know if you have an early printing Signet or a later printing Signet, which picture Fleming's on the back and doesn't have his death date on there. And of course, you have what are, to me, the totally iconic red-edged pages of all Signet Bond books. So this to me, again, when I think of James Bond the novels and Fleming's Bond, I think of these Signet editions, and I think of these red-edged pages and how much of my life has been spent buried in these. And this one is in really nice shape. I've always tried to keep my books in good condition, or at least as close as I can to the condition in which I got them. But it's getting harder and harder to get Signet copies from this era that aren't totally trashed or destroyed. And it is well worth it, because to me, they just have the spirit of Fleming and Bond, and of a different era to them that not all editions can recapture. And again, I do have a lot of nostalgia for these, because I gravitated towards these in my childhood, because this is what I could find in used bookshops pretty easily. As you can see here on the credits page, this is already the 25th American printing, and rather amusingly, all the others have been removed, and the 25th, it's kind of sideways. It's a little diagonal. It's been printed on there. So they've already gone through 25 printings of just Casino Royale alone by this point. Again, probably sometime around the mid-60s would be the printing date for this particular copy. And I even have always adored the Signet text and layout. Again, this just screams Fleming's Bond to me. So if I ever think of the Fleming Bond novels, I'm thinking of these. I'm thinking of the red edge pages, and even the particular font and size of the text. As you can see here, there is far less browning of the pages as you get on the UK pan paperbacks. It is possible to find these in good shape like this, but again, most copies by this point are pretty beat up, and if they weren't stored very well, they will have significant browning of the pages, but it is possible. So I do heartily recommend you track down some of these Signet paperbacks if you don't have, if you've never read one, because it really does give a different experience, at least in my opinion. Now we come to if this category had a dark horse fan favorite. This series is not very well known, and unfortunately, they only did a handful of the original Fleming novels. I believe it's just 4, and they were done around the time that Bantam picked up the rights, or at least some rights, and this was around the time they published the paperback of Colonel Sun, which was Kingsley Amos's continuation novel, the first officially commissioned Bond continuation novel. So when Bantam came around to publish the paperback, they commissioned new artwork by the legendary poster and Western artist Frank McCarthy, who is one of my all-time favorite artists, of course, who I became primarily familiar with after his work on the Thunderball poster campaign, and of course, You Only Live Twice, and On Her Majesty's Secret Service, and many, many other just breathtaking film posters. Well, as you can see, if you know McCarthy's style, you can already tell, even though it's a small paperback, this is from that Bantam series. This is their reprint of Casino Royale, which has this new cover design where James Bond is all down the side. And again, they did this in reference to McCarthy's commissioned art for the paperback of the US paperback, I should say, of Colonel Sun. So this is his painting for Casino Royale. And I'm going to try and hold it a bit closer so you can get a better focus. Words do not do it justice. It's unfortunate that it's partially covered by the James Bond logo. It's unfortunate that you can't buy prints of his work for these. And it is such a damn shame that he didn't do all the novels because, again, words do not do this justice until you see it in person. This is absolutely breathtaking. And of course, on this wonderful black background, I don't know if you can tell, but this is actually a really nice and glossy paperback cover. I've been lucky to find a few of these after years of bookshop hunting in really nice shape like this is. So this was a beautiful surprise to find this particular copy of Casino Royale because they're not very common. I rarely see them, and usually when I do, they are extremely beat up. Show you the spine. And all of these were done in a similar style. Colonel Sun had two versions. It had a standard one with the McCarthy art, and then it had a revised one where it had this James Bond logo applied over it as well to better match these. But again, they only wound up doing, I believe it's 4 of the Fleming novels in total, which again is such a damn shame because this art is so beautiful. And on the rear, you just get a repeat with a little bit of critical blurbs about Fleming. And because it's Bantam, it has their sort of traditional yellow-edged pages, which, of course, Signet would eventually switch to on some of their later James Bond paperbacks. As you can see here, this is a second printing of the Bantam edition and is dated 1971. So again, this is several years on down the road, and in this short period of time where Bantam wound up with some of the books. So of course they did Colonel Sun, and then of Fleming titles they did Casino Royale and For Much With Love and Goldfinger, among one or two others. So it's, of course, similar to the text style and layout of the Signet edition, but it is noticeably thicker, and the page margins are a little wider. So this might be a little bit easier on the eyes if you are not used to or have trouble with smaller paperbacks. And it's just a wonderful variant, again, with this absolutely gorgeous art. So if you're a fan of collecting paperbacks just for their art, or different editions just for their jackets, or particularly if they have famous illustrators or famous painters doing the covers like this, this is a wonderful series to collect. And again, there's not many of them, so you really only have 4 plus the Colonel Sun paperback. They are out there, but they are rather scarce, particularly in comparison to the more common Signet paperbacks. But it's a wonderful little aspect up on books to collect, and they're very wonderful display pieces, as you can see here. Now we come to my second childhood copy, which, of course, is the 1980s reprint from Berkeley. This was done in the time of the 1980s John Gardner continuation novel, starting with License Renewed in 1981. Berkeley and eventually the Charter imprint started reprinting the classic Fleming novels as well, with similar cover art. They would all feature different colors. Here, Casino Royale has purple, and then a Bond silhouette, in keeping very much with the same exact design of the John Gardner paperbacks. And I do think these are actually quite underrated. I've always liked this sort of layout. It is sort of reminiscent to how the Signet editions had Fleming and the title, and they have a very vibrant colored background. So the actual jackets are very eye-catching, just like the earlier 60s editions. Of course, they do match overall, even though the colors are wildly different across the board. But if you had every single one of the Berkeley Charter paperbacks, you could ostensibly build a complete set from Casino Royale all the way up through the end of Gardner's 80s run, and when they finally changed over the design. And of course, you could continue all the way to the end of Gardner's run and have a complete run from Fleming to Gardner. The spines all match. This is pretty much the same exact design you see on the John Gardner novels. And again, of course, the only difference between all of these is going to be the colors will be wildly different. And then the rear with ads for each or 6 other Bond novels. But what I do really like about these is, this is in a much easier to read style font. And so it's exactly the same in style as the Gardner paperbacks. So this is a 7th edition of this Berkeley printing. So this is dated 1985. And they would do one-offs and occasionally print some that had little printed on blurbs advertising the latest film as a sort of tie-in, just as all the previous paperbacks did the same thing or did one-offs or did specific movie tie-in versions. They didn't publish all of these in order. They did them in batches, so some are more difficult to find than others if you're trying to complete a set of the Berkeley Charter Fleming novels. And then this has the updated title font randomly from one of the 70s or early 80s paperback designs. As you can see, it's a much easier to read font and text. And these are my favorite copies to just carry around, in a book bag or a backpack or something if I'm wanting to read Bond on the go, because they are relatively inexpensive and they're very easy to pick up and read. And again, they match perfectly with the John Gardner paperbacks. So here is my lone hardback copy of Casino Royale. This is the 1960s US Macmillan Company Book Club edition. They did a matching set of Fleming hardbacks in this cover design. Each one matches with this sort of bikini-clad girl and then this gun logo in various colors and things. When you first see these, they look very simplistic, but there is a sort of charm to them, and you can build a set out of these if you track down all of them. There's nothing particularly fancy or special about these, but it is a nice hardcover set if you're looking to just have a relatively inexpensive hardback collection of Fleming originals. You can still find these in antique stores and various used bookshops at, again, decent prices. The trick is, of course, finding them in nice shape. They do have the sort of cut edges, and then the top is actually blue tinged. The actual book itself is just a plain gray, and then the spine itself is relatively simple, but it has a nice classy feel to it in a way. And as you can see by the title page, it looks very similar to the Signet paperback. It just has the original 1953 credit date on the copyright information. Again, the text is in a much bigger font compared to what's in the paperback. So these are nice additions. You don't see them pop up as often, and this is pretty much the only one I have. But again, anytime I've ever found a Bond variant for super cheap, and if it's in nice shape, I can't help but add it to the collection shelf. So now we move on to Fleming's second Bond novel, Live and Let Die. These are my 4 paperback editions, again, from various different series. This is the common and well-loved Pan series, with the very minimalist but very striking art where you have a skeleton hand coming out of the sand, presumably holding some doubloons or grasping for some doubloons from Bloody Morgan's pirate treasure, as Mr. Big has discovered in the novel. Show you the spine. This particular copy is in really nice shape. No real damage to the spine, no creasing, and definitely no slant on the spine itself. It's nice and straight. The rear has a really nice design, and again with the classic British-style 007 logo. And this one has far less browning of the actual pages, so this is definitely just pretty much about the best condition UK pan paperback that I currently have. So this is credited as an 11th printing from 1963, and of course this is the original UK text. Of course, most Fleming fans and fans of the book bond are probably already aware Live and Let Die is one of, well, pretty much the primary Fleming novel that has two distinct different versions. It was slightly edited and tweaked for the American market after the US publishers felt that certain sequences and one particular chapter would not be very acceptable in the US market, considering some of the language and the views and things. So when I grew up reading the novel and loving it and really enjoying it, with historical context in mind and different things, I couldn't understand why there was a bit of controversy surrounding it until I realized I was reading the US version. And then when I finally got a UK version, it suddenly made sense because it's much more obvious. So, of course, if you aren't aware of this, if you look very closely here, if I can get the shadow to drop out, you look very closely here at Chapter 5. It's a particular chapter heading that you will not find in any American edition of this book or any reprint outside of UK versions or some of the handful that have actually used the original UK text. So it's not heavily changed. It's in that chapter, of course, it's the chapter heading, the chapter itself, the chapter title, and one particular passage. But outside of that, that's the primary place where there was some editing done for the US version. So that's why Live and Let Die, you really do have to have at least two different editions with the US and UK texts, just so you have it both ways. Again, this is probably just about my best condition of the pan paperbacks. Moving on to, again, my personal and childhood favorites. This was my personal copy, and this is the copy I reread every year. This is my copy of the US Signet paperback. Again, a later printing due to the 007 logo in the corner. It's got a little wear, and unfortunately, the top corner was lost many years ago, and you can tell there's definitely some wear on the spine. Something you'll find very common the more these were read, and I've actually had copies where of Signet paperbacks where they were so well read that eventually the actual front cover literally just falls off. But if you take care of these, they'll last a lifetime, and this I've had since I was a kid. Again, it's a little more worn than some of my others, but I enjoy the Signet paperback so much, and I like looking at the various printing variations and trying to look at what era of the printing run that particular copies come from. Here's the spine, again with the matching Signet design, and then the rear, again with the revised jacket, and because it's a later printing, you have the second Fleming photo. And as you can see, what I was talking about earlier with Casino Royale, you can really see it here, how the white background has started to, get this sort of dusky brown to it. You'll find this on a lot of copies. The more it's been read and handled, the more that the color's going to fade. And again, that quality these have of wanting to sort of adhere to things, particularly your fingers sometimes, that you can definitely tell when a copy's been more loved and more read. Again, the classic red edge Signet pages. This is also credited as a 25th printing. And if you look here, you can see very clearly that the UK Chapter 5 does not exist, and it's been retitled 7th Avenue. So that's how you know you have the US text when it's Chapter 5 is 7th Avenue. And again, it's not really a great portion of the book has been edited or censored or changed. It's just a few specific elements. But if you are interested in seeing the differences for yourself and actually reading that, you will need to track down either one of the modern reprints that does use the British text. They've done it at least once or twice on the past U.S. reprint run or two. Otherwise, you will have to track down a version printed in England, which has, as far as I know, always had the original UK 1954 text. Next, we move on to the 1980s Berkeley reprinting. I was able to find a really minty condition copy. Again, keeping with the same cover design, and for each, they changed the various colors, keeping them bold, and then have a Bond silhouette in a various action pose, posing with pistol, which has become a very common recurring thing on a lot of Bond paperbacks, and I've always liked it. I know some people aren't really fans of it, but it really started in this era, and it continued into the paperbacks of the Raymond Benson novels into the early to mid 2000s as well. So the spine, and then the rear keeps the same type of design as all the other Berkeley Jove Charter paperbacks. This was credited as a 5th Berkeley printing from November 1983. Again, Chapter 5 is, of course, 7th Avenue, this being a U.S. paperback. And again, you get the very nice, easy-to-read font that I really enjoy so much. I still wish that this sort of font was used today. It is specifically mentioned as an easier-to-read font in the copyright information page. But I've read this era of Bond printing so often that I'm very accustomed to this particular layout. And again, if you do have trouble reading older paperbacks with much smaller font, finding a set of these and tracking down these particular volumes might be better for you. But I will point out, even though this copy's in nice shape, as you can see along the top, there's some browning of the pages. So I don't know if this was stored out in the sun for a long time, or just kept in a box in a garage for a while before I found it in a bookstore or something. But that's something you will deal with any sort of vintage paperback, especially nowadays, because this is from the 80s and it already has some browning on it. And then finally, we come to this UK edition. This is from Penguin's reprint series. This is their UK paperback. They did a number of different sizes and shapes and some hardbacks with this particular design style. All the Fleming novels were reprinted with, again, a very simplistic but a jacket design, or cover design, I should say, all with a central image here. They went with flames, obviously from torches. They look nice enough, even though they are very simple. But the reason why I picked this up a number of years ago is because this has the original UK text. So this was how I read the UK text for the first time, and then eventually found this vintage pan copy. Show you the spine, and all of these match pretty nicely, so you can build a set of Fleming originals out of this run. These were all done around 2002 or so they are readily available, and you can find them floating around here in the US in bookstores as well. Of course, if you've ever read a Penguin or paperback before, you will note that the actual text and layout and everything is very familiar. And of course, if you note right here, Chapter 5 is back to being the original UK Chapter 5. So this is the UK text, and since this point, I believe the modern reprints that are available now of this novel do have the UK text, but I could be wrong. You never know for sure until you physically look at all of them, but your best bet is to just check the chapter heading, and if you can't seem to find one, you will have to track down an actual British copy. Here we go with Moonraker, the third James Bond novel, and this one's pretty simple because I just have two vintage US 60s Signet paperbacks. This is my much used and well-loved childhood reading copy that, again, I still, when I do my yearly reread, I'm always still reading my originals. And then this is a very minty copy I was able to find relatively recently in the past year or two. But you can see the difference between a very well-loved Signet and a very much more pristine Signet. And there always was a little bit of variation in the printing, so you can have color variations and, of course, obviously misprints as well. So usually no two Signets are ever 100% alike, and they did do so many print runs that there are many variants and variations. I really should go further into that because there's almost a whole science to just the Signet printing history, but I've only dabbled in it. But this will give you an example of what a mint copy and a well-used copy look like. So obviously the spine on the my much read copy is obviously gone a bit brown and has some wear and such. And of course, I bought it used originally, so a lot of that was already there. And then the rear, these are earlier copies, so of course they have the earlier Fleming photo. But this was before they changed the photo, but they already are mentioning Fleming's death date in 1964. So that automatically dates these copies to at least being from late 1964 into early to mid 1965. So, of course, earlier Signet paperbacks that have this photo of Fleming but don't have the last sentence about his death in 1964 are obviously before that point, at least in 1964. So these are earlier copies than the Signets I've already shown, but not early enough to be late 1964. Again, you can tell the older, well, sorry, should say the more used copy, the white has gone almost completely brown, and it's got much more of a flat feel to it because it's been read a lot, whereas this one has more of that sort of, again, I hate to use the word sticky, but it's just a particular thing you get used to on these. That's one of their endearing quirks, I think. And of course, it has a much cleaner appearance. There's the red edged pages, and again, the more worn and more red these books got, the more the red starts to fade. So another sign of having a really clean copy is that the actual red is still really nice and vibrant, and also the corners are nice and sharp because the corners of these books start to get rounded and worn, as you can see here, with the more they're red. So this is credited as a 15th printing in September 1964. And there's the text page. This edition is pretty much identical, but of course in just much nicer shape. But this one seems slightly later as it's just credited as an 18th printing without the rest of the printing history. And again, it's just on there where they've obviously replaced it. But again, so much cleaner and far less browning on the actual pages. So now we move on to Bond number 4, which is Diamonds Are Forever. Here I have 3 editions, starting with my original US 60s Signet paperback copy. This is a much earlier printing again because you don't have the 007 logo. That's always the easiest indicator if you're looking at copies and you want an earlier printing for whatever reason. This one has a really striking pink background cover to it. Again, it's very eye-catching, and there's just something about these that, even though they are rather simplistic, they have a charm factor to them. And I really like the small artist rendering of Bond first meeting Tiffany Case. And actually, when you know that scene from the novel very well, and you look very closely, it is a really accurate depiction of that scene as she's staring into the mirror. Here's the spine. And then the rear. And again, you can tell this is an early copy because the actual rear layout is slightly different. They don't list as many titles as we saw on Moonraker. Should have mentioned that as well. The actual list of titles is smaller. Here it's the other photo of Fleming, but you see here the blurb is smaller, and of course it does not mention his death date in 1964, so this means this is significantly earlier than the copies of Moonraker. Red edged pages. And this is credited as a third Signet printing in June of 1962. As you can see on this copy, there's a little bit of browning on the pages, but it's very minimal, and this is, again, a rather nice condition Signet. Now we have, again, one of these UK British Penguin reprints from the same series as we just saw in the Live and Let Die copy. Pretty nice cover. Again, all of these, while they're very simplistic, they're good enough. And, this is what a lot of people are going to have access to these days. There's the spine. And then the rear. And there is enough of a matching cover design to these, and they all have their own 007 logo on the front and back. So there is a uniformity, which is nice. But other than that, it's exactly the same. These are a bit thicker in the terms of the actual pages themselves, so they do have a little heft to them. That's just because they're printed with wider margins, and the actual book frame itself is bigger. And of course, this is also from around 2002, 2003. And then my hardcover copy is actually the movie tie-in from around 1971. You don't really see these all that often, and they didn't often do actual hardcover with dust jacket movie tie-ins. Almost always it is the paperbacks. So I was really excited to find this, and of course it has the wonderful poster artwork, and it's printed very nicely. Show you the spine, and the spine is a nice little wraparound as well. Then the rear has the credits, but it uses the 007 logo that actually turns up on some other paperbacks in the 1970s in some various print runs. So, of course, it has a little wear where originally it still has this little fragment of tape on it, so it's caused, unfortunately, some browning here on the inside flaps. Show you the spine there. Again, this is a Macmillan printing, so I'm pretty sure this would be very similar to what you'd see on their Macmillan Book Club edition of Diamonds Are Forever. Of course, this is also a book club edition, so again, I'm pretty sure this is just a updated dust jacket. So the jacket's a movie tie-in, but the actual book itself should be pretty much identical to the earlier 60s book club edition that would match the Casino Royale copy that I went over a little while ago. So here are my three primary editions of Bond 5 From Russia with Love. So I have my original Signet copy, which is, again, still my go-to. Again, this is a earlier copy due to the lack of the 007 logo on the front. Really striking cover. Again, it's a simple white, and the James Bond thriller being in red really helps to catch the eye. But again, it's these small illustrations that just really capture the spirit of the story being told. And because they're small, you always wind up staring at them very intently, and so they sort of burn their way into your mind's eyes. I simply think of From Russia with Love, the novel, I immediately picture this white signet jacket with this art of Bond and Tanya. It just immediately comes to mind. There's the spine. Again, another way to tell, or sometimes the earlier signet copies, is sometimes they won't have the black signet on the top of the spine. Again, the rear, you have the shorter list of titles, the older picture of Fleming, and of course the lack of the his death in 1964. So again, this is an earlier signet printing of the novel. The classic red edged pages. And this is dated as a 12th printing for Signet in September 1963. So ironically, this is coming out near to or around the same time the film version is coming out. Of course, here in the U.S., we got it significantly after the UK premiere in 1963, and they did do some book tie-ins, just some reprints of the novel in paperback form with a special cover or at least a little blurb saying now a major motion picture. But this one is just the standard Signet. But of course, it's just fun to note it was released around the same time the film was. Again, a little bit of browning on the pages, but still perfectly readable and wonderful. And I do like these Signet editions when they have just, the right amount of aging to them. There's something about the slightly brown pages with the red edges and the Signet font and everything that just screams Fleming to me. Next, we have another of these gorgeous Bantam paperbacks. So this is another of the handful they did with Colonel Sun around the end of the 60s into the early 70s. So again, with this gorgeous artwork that is unfortunately obscured by the James Bond logo. Again, I would love to just see the original art sometime without all this stuff on it and without it being very small. But again, really beautiful paperback, a nice glossy cover, which again, for a paperback at this time is rather uncommon. Again, it's a little bit thicker than what a Signet paperback is, significantly, of course. But you have this spine. This matches Casino Royale very well, but with a completely different bold color choice. And odd to see, again, a usage of a sort of pink. Again, the rear matches. It's Bantam, so it has, again, the yellow edges. But this is in really excellent shape. So again, I'm so pleased that I've been able to find most of these in really awesome condition. But it's definitely taken a while because you don't see these pop up all the time. And again, usually when you do, they're pretty trashed. So again, this is from 1971 for the printing notes. So pretty much these were all coming out in 71, after along with the second printing of the Colonel Sun paperback, where they updated the art to have this James Bond logo running along the front to match. And again, the text block's a little different because Bantam altered it to fit their style. So, of course, these are significantly thicker than your typical Signet copy, as you can see here. Now we move on to my lone hardback. This is from the James Bond Classic Library series that was done here in the U.S. in the early to mid-1990s. I unfortunately found out about this several years after the fact, and as a budding young Bond obsessive, this was really the only major print run series for the novels here in the U.S. when I was growing up in the 90s. And of course, I didn't have much, if any, internet access growing up. So, and eBay wasn't really a thing yet. So the notion of buying books online was just not there. So I have found a number of these in the years since, and they have interesting covers. It's a particular art style. It's not for everybody, but they are are one of a kind. They do have a style of their own, and it's actually gotten pretty tricky trying to find these particular editions, again, in good condition, and they're only from the 90s, but I just missed out on these, so of course it would have been much easier had I been able to purchase these brand new, had I been, older than I was, because these just kind of passed me by, because these were all, when I was, 5 years old or younger, really. But it's been nice trying to find some of these and stumbling across some of the others. And when you put them all side by side, the art style matches, so they have a uniformity of their own. And they do recreate at least some scene or element from the novel in a sort of... I don't exactly know how you would describe this art. It's not quite cartoonish, but it's a particular style, and there's some nice color usage. Show you the spine, and all these are done in similar styles, so the handful of these I have, you'll be able to note, they match this style and layout. Now, it just has a 1985 copyright renewal date. I've never known exactly for sure when these were done. I always assumed it was the early to mid-90s, and I think they were primarily sold in like Books A Million stores and things like that. But again, unfortunately, it just kind of passed me by because it was just too much ahead of my time. But the actual quality is really nice. So you can build a set of Fleming titles out of this classic library series and have a nice shelf of Fleming hardcovers. And again, there's absolutely nothing wrong with these, and they have gotten rather scarce. The font size is nice. They're easy to pick up and read. And again, they have a charm of their own. The book itself is nicely bound. It's very simple, but the actual spine out of the dust jacket looks pretty cool. Here are my 4 editions of Fleming's 6th James Bond novel, Dr. No, from 1958. Here I have 2 copies of the original US Signet paperback. This is my original, which, as I mentioned in one of the previous books, you can have the covers completely come off. Well, this one I unfortunately picked up used and read for many years, and as you can see here, the cover has worn to a point that it's just barely attached here in the center. So I was able to find on almost exact same printing that is now my go-to read copy, but I still keep my original simply for nostalgia purposes. And again, very striking. I love the black and then just the colors going on here. It is very eye-catching, and once again, the illustration, even though it's very small, try and get this centered here. It's when Bond and Honey are being menaced on the island, and Bond looks very rough and tumble, and of course, as it alludes to here, Honey, of course, is nude when she's originally on the beach, so she doesn't have the iconic bikini from the film. And I love the purples and blues of the night sky behind them, and what looks like a little flame in the background, probably from the dragon tank or gunfire. Show you the spines of both. Again, both of these are relatively worn. As with all my Signets, I would love to have a perfectly mint copy to have as well. And both of these are also later printings due to the final style of cover design and the picture Fleming used. This is a 25th printing credit. This one doesn't have anywhere near the amount of browning as my original copy does. And of course, I can actually open it safely without the cover completely falling off. This one should be a little bit later, as of course it's credited as a 28th printing. Here is the 1980s Berkeley reprint in the same style on an orange background with, again, a random Bond with pistol pose. The spine. The matching rear to the other books. This is credited as being from December 1982. I must say it is always a little strange seeing the Fleming text in the same form and shape as you see the John Gardner books, but of course I always jumped back and forth between these Berkeley 80s books and the 60s Signet paperbacks, so I'm used to both, but I'm more used to Fleming in the Signet form, so reading Fleming in the Berkeley more John Gardner form is always a little bit of a switch. And then lastly, here is the James Bond Classic Library printing. And here it depicts a moment from the great climax of the film where Bond has to go mano-a-mano with a giant squid of all things. And if you weren't already aware that the books definitely take their own pathways and sometimes the films heavily adapt them, sometimes they change them, and there are moments that have never been in any film. Well, this moment and this particular rendering of it on this Classic Library edition will definitely tell you, because you'll be wondering, okay, where's the giant squid coming from? So there are always great rewards for reading Fleming for the first time, and this is one of those moments. The other in this book perhaps being Dr. No's demise compared to the film version, and the one that'll keep you up at night is, of course, it's not a tarantula as it is in the film. Here in the novel, it's a much more horrifying, deadly tropical centipede. So it's the same style and layout as the From Russia with Love edition. Very large printing on this as well, so it is very easily readable. Here is the book itself, and the nice matching spine with the gold lettering. So now we move on to Goldfinger. These are my 4 paperbacks, starting with the 1963 printing UK Pan paperback. Again, keeping the minimalist style here, catching a glimpse of a Rolls Royce meant to be, Goldfinger's Rolls Royce Silver Phantom. Show you the spine and the rear. Again, this copy is dated to 1963. And it's in rather nice shape without much browning on the pages. Next is the Signet paperback. Now, I do really want to get the original Signet, which has a really nice cover image and is sort of on a purple background. This is the specific movie tie-in they did once Goldfinger was released and became a massive smash, record-breaking success everywhere. So, but they did keep the standard design. This is one of the few times they totally changed the cover, made a special one, and you don't see this all the time. Usually you see the traditional Signet one with, again, the purple cover. So this, of course, has the iconic figure of a golden girl on a really striking black background. It looks really eye-catching. And, of course, you have the little blurb with the little tiny picture of Sean Connery, of course, advertising that the film had just recently been released. But you still have the James Bond thriller here. The rear is totally different, and of course, were it not for the white spine to match the others, the actual Golden Girl image would wrap around. So you can kind of hold the cover like this. So again, really well done for a simple updated movie tie-in jacket. And they were nice enough to keep matching spines, well, a spine to match the others, but here the Signet and Fleming's name is done in this sort of aqua green, so it does make it stand out in that way. This copy's in really nice shape with the red edge pages. Not a lot of browning on the actual interior pages. Of course, it just says 19th printing, but I would have to assume this was, early 1965, because that's when the film came out here in the U.S. And this, of course, is the U.S. movie tie-in version of the Signet paperback. Now we have another of these absolutely gorgeous Bantam books, but this one in particular, it doesn't have the James Bond logo obscuring the side, and it's absolutely gorgeous. It could hang on the wall of any respectable art museum, and you could just stare at it. And of course, you do have some actual, female nudity going on, which isn't super common even for paperbacks of this era. Mass market paperbacks, to just have that out in the open and obvious. So also on this really very dark brown, almost like has a wood texture to the background, so it looks really nice. Again, on this same sort of glossy cover as the other two Bantam books I've shown. So there's a little bit of wear on the actual cover, but the actual book itself is in nice shape. So here is that 007 logo from the Diamonds Are Forever movie tie-in hardback. So again, I said that would pop up again somewhere in this video, and there you have it. Because it's Bantam, it has the yellow-edged pages. So this one is slightly later, as it came in 1972. So all of these Bantam bonds are from the roughly 1971 into 72 and 73. And of course, then we come to my most cherished of all, the book that got me into Fleming and the book bond, this rather beat up, scuffed up copy of the 80s Charter reprint with the same style as the other 80s books to match the John Gardner novels. This is the copy I bought at a library sale for 10 cents. I still remember it only cost me a dime. And, it's a little the worse for wear. I've read this more times than I can possibly count. And of course, it's done in the same style as the others. So, of course, the Charter versions are going to be slightly later than the Berkeley ones. So this came out in May of 1987. They just changed the publisher imprint, from Berkeley to Charter, but the actual book itself is totally identical to, finding an earlier Berkeley one. Again, there's a little bit of browning around the top edge of the pages. And then we have the James Bond Classic Library hardcover version, where they obviously have taken a little bit of dramatic license, because this is a scene not in the novel. It's in the film, where Bond discovers Jill's lifeless golden body in his hotel room, whereas in the novel, he only finds out about it later, and it's told to him by Tilly Masterson. So it's one of the great examples of the film series making an iconic visual moment out of something in the novel that's only mentioned after the fact. And there's your spine. Here are my 4 editions of For Your Eyes Only. which of course is the short story compilation. Signet has reflected that here by changing the side logo to being 5 James Bond thrillers. And of course, I have an earlier copy with some unfortunate cover damage, and then a better second, or I should say better later copy, as you can tell by the 007 logo. Here are the spines. And of course, right off the bat, you can tell the difference between the earlier and later copies. Shorter title listing, shorter blurb, earlier picture of Fleming, as opposed to much later on in the printing runs, the full list of titles, the later picture of Fleming, and the mention of his death in 1964. Again, you can tell that this copy has much cleaner red-edged pages, whereas this one's obviously been well read and used and abused over the years. So this is a 6th printing from July 1963, whereas this copy is just credited as a 24th printing, so this would be significantly later on. Now this one's interesting. It's a rather uncommon variant. Of course, it's advertised as a tie-in to the film's release in 1981, but this is a Canadian printing from Triad Granada is the publisher that's credited. And it's a very, I'm trying to think of the right word, but it's a very paperback cover for the 70s and 80s. You know, it looks like it was, taken right off of a paperback rack. It seems like it would be any other action thriller paperback, but of course it's Bond, and it's depicting, at least, or trying to depict, an element of the For Your Eyes Only short story with Bond and Judy Havelock to tie into the film. And the male in question has a sort of, hold this a little bit closer, it kind of sort of has a little touch of Roger Moore to it. So they are trying to catch the eyes of people who are interested in the film and maybe entice them to purchase the novel. You don't see this particular version practically ever. I was very surprised to stumble across a copy. It's in pretty good shape, and it does have the little blurb down here tying it into the film's release. There's the spine. And then the rear is pretty simplistic. And then we have the Berkeley 1980s print. This is the reprint. It's dated to about 1983. And it's in pretty nice shape. Again, trying to find all of these 80s reprints for all the Fleming novels is actually easier said than done, and some are much harder to find than others. I believe For Your Eyes Only also had a particular movie tie-in version in this series. I think it's just a little printed blurb on it, so that's, of course, a harder to find variant. These are my 2 editions of Thunderball. This is the US 1960s Signet paperback with a very apt blue front cover to suggest underwater, which really helps to sell this lovely image of Domino seemingly with Bond or approaching Spectre Frogman. Show you the spine. And then the rear is the sort of in-between, where you have the first photo, the first type of rear jacket with the shorter title list, but then it mentions Fleming's death date as well. And of course, by this point, the Signet paperbacks all carry the mention of Kevin McClory. So this is credited as a 15th printing from September 1964. So really just before the wave of Bond mania was about to sweep the world. Now, this much worn copy from the 80s Berkeley reprints was my childhood copy. So I got this relatively soon after getting Goldfinger. So it's one of the Bond novels I've read more than the others. But it's still held up pretty well. So you can get these in really beat up shape like this. And they're still excellent, just simple reading copies to have on hand. Show you the spine. This one is from May 1983. This is my lone copy of The Spy Who Loved Me, the experimental Fleming James Bond novel that really is a better book than people usually give it credit for. So it's one of those I actually enjoy coming back to and trying to get a different handle on it. Of course, it's an experimental novel because the book is told entirely from the first-person perspective of the female protagonist. And I really like the Signet choice of color and how it goes perfectly into the little art, which again shows you the location where, of course, the Dreamy Pines motor court is. You have Bond lighting a cigarette, and then you have Viv herself on her little Vespa motoring away. Show you the spine, and then the rear. Again, it's the first type of rear signet, rear cover, I should say, with the first Fleming photo, but with the addition of his death date. Just credited as simply a 15th printing, but of course that would, you could at least date this to, 1965 or so. I do like that they kept the rendering of the Dreamy Pines motor court, so you can actually get the layout in picture form. Here are my 3 editions of On Her Majesty's Secret Service, and here you have 3 excellent covers. I think it's probably just about impossible to have not be able to come up with a good cover for OHMSS. And for me, this has got to be the best of the UK mid-60s pan paperbacks in terms of the cover image, because as you can see here, I mean, yes, it gives the ending away, which is rather unfortunate, but man, that is just absolutely perfect. The snow, of course, suggesting the snowy landscape of Piz Gloria, and then the wedding ring by itself and only a small trail of blood on it. It's just, it speaks volumes. It's all you need. And again, while it is totally giving the ending away, my goodness, is that a cover image. So for me, this is the best of this particular series and one of the great James Bond book covers, whether it's hardback or paperback. It's just an image that's always stuck with me, so I'm so happy I finally have a physical panned copy. Show you the spine and the rear. But not to be outdone, Signet had a art choice design of their own with this sort of Gryphon type figure with what seemingly looks like a Walther PPK in some ways, but with pistol and sort of suggesting Bond is, Britain's last line of defense. And I just love that image as well. Of course, originally this had a printed on blurb here, but the actual wording has long since faded. This was my childhood copy, so this is the one I'm most used to reading. And I have seen it with this still on there. I would like to get a mint copy someday, so I have both versions. But I still really like this art as well, even though it's not quite as immediately gripping as this amazing UK pan art here. Of course, it's later on in the Signet run, so it has the 007 logo. And of course, the final style of rear cover with the updated photo. Red edge pages. It's an 11th printing. Then we come to the James Bond Classic Library, which has a really dynamic cover. I think this is probably the best cover art design they came up with for their particular hardcovers. Again, maybe some influence from the film, but it looks really lovely. Again, I think this is the best jacket art they had. Here's the book itself. A really nice, simple spine. These are my copies of You Only Live Twice. Unfortunately, neither one is in perfect shape, but the actual books themselves are in perfect condition. So here is the US Signet paperback, which abandons the traditional design of the other ones, but sort of keeps some of the same elements and has a bit of Japanese sort of imagery thrown in. So it's a nice looking cover. Unfortunately, the whole front corner here has this big tear, which unfortunately I've never found a clean copy of this particular edition, at least not yet, to replace this with, because otherwise this book is in perfect shape. Show you the spine. They were nice enough, again, to keep the spine the same so it matches on the shelf. And you can tell condition-wise just by the spine. The rest of this book is in perfect shape because, of course, this was the penultimate Fleming novel. It's promoting The Man with the Golden Gun and also, again, abandons the design of the other books in the Signet run. But it does maintain the red edge pages, so it's same book size and dimensions and printing and everything else, but on the last two books, You Only Live Twice and The Man with the Golden Gun, they really abandoned the design of the others, so it's unfortunate they don't 100% match. I just wish the cover wasn't torn on the front, because otherwise this is a perfect condition copy. So this is credited as a first Signet paperback printing in July 1965. Now we move on to the North American, or I should say the U.S. first edition, with this, for me, iconic art of the Japanese flag, but with the traditional red dot having a little bit of blood start to trickle down. It's just a beautiful image. It's so stark, and it's all alone by itself on this white dust jacket, so it's always stuck with me. It's an image that's just absolutely fascinating. Unfortunately, this copy that I've had for many years since I was a kid growing up, it's torn and ripped and things. So I would love to replace this or get a copy eventually with a perfect dust jacket. But other than that, everything else is in good shape. There's a little browning on the spine. but the spine also keeps the red dot with the blood coming down. And then a shot of Fleming there on the back. You have the sort of edged pages here on the side, but on the top it is red edged. The inside flap. The other great thing I've always loved about this is when you take off the dust jacket, you get this. Fleming's signature is actually printed into the actual book itself. This has led some people to think that all copies of this book are somehow just autographed, and you'll find copies on eBay or copies in bookstores listed as autographed with a high price tag, but that's not the case because it's simply printed on the actual book itself. But it's almost as if, the actual book is engraved, and so it's a really lovely touch that I really, it's one of my favorite things about any of the Bond hardcovers. And there's your spine. So here we are at Fleming's final James Bond novel, The Man with the Golden Gun, which he was never able to fully polish with a follow-up draft because, of course, he unfortunately passed away before he really completed the novel to his total satisfaction. So it doesn't have the greatest reputation, but I really do feel it is underrated, even among the other James Bond novels. I think that whole factor, and along with it not being as, shall we say, impressive on the whole as the previous novels, has given it an undeserved reputation. I do feel it deserves a better reputation than what it has. So here I have two versions of the Signet paperback. This is the original 1960s paperback, still with a Woolco sticker on it that I haven't been able to get off without tearing anything. This one, again, like You Only Live Twice, they abandoned the classic Signet style, but the actual book is still the same, with the same spine and red edge pages and everything. They did keep a similar kind of art, but moved it to the top. But, of course, it's kind of obscured by this big gold star banner, printed on blurb, much like what's faded off of my OHMSS Signet copy. There's the spine. At least they were nice enough to keep the spines matching. In the rear, have the red edge Signet pages. This is a first printing from July of 1966. Now, this was my childhood copy, or the copy I grew up with. This is still a Signet copy, but this is from the 1970s. I switched over to this type of design for a little while, and I don't think they did all of the Fleming novels in this particular style. So if you like this, I could be wrong. I can't remember for certain, but I'm pretty sure I don't think they did all of them this way. And even though this is technically newer, you don't see this particular style from the 70s pop up nearly as much in used shops as you do the 60s Signet originals. So, of course, it's a little worn because I bought this used as, growing up. This has always been the copy that I primarily read. So it also, very strangely, for Signet being known for having the red edge pages, this one has yellow edged pages. The actual contents are pretty much the same in terms of the text and the text block, but everything else is updated around it. So you can see by the printing dates at the bottom, this is up to the 20th printing for Signet paperbacks of this title. But the interior text and everything is exactly the same. Now here is the US first edition hardback. Again, like You Only Live Twice, the dust jacket's kind of torn. It's not in the best of shape for the dust jacket, but the actual book itself is in pretty nice shape. And again, it was just an ultra cheap copy of the original US printing. There's the spine. And the shot of Fleming on the back. Again, not the best copy, but I couldn't pass up getting an original US hardback for, literally $1 or $2. And then, of course, this has the little die cut area for the supposed bullet holes on the jacket cover. So when you try to remove the dust jacket, underneath it's got this paper, which is what gives you that bullet hole effect. And then lastly, we come to Octopussy and the Living Daylights. So here I have the UK pan paperback with this really nice image of a gold bar, obviously from, I guess, falling out of the cachet when Smythe steals it in the flashback portion of the story. And there's the spine, the rear. This is credited as a 1968 second printing of the paperback. Now we have the US Signet edition with this shot of Fleming on the cover instead. Again, getting away from their traditional style but keeping the same dimensions. So the spine matches. And the rear goes for something completely different. Have the red edge pages. What's great about this, as you can see here, it adds the property of a lady short story as well, which is commonly tacked on in most editions, at least nowadays. But of course, the original editions and most early ones will just have Octopussy and the Living Daylights. So this is a first Signet printing from July 1967. What's also great about this keeps the text and custom chapter headings and title headings for each of the stories from the US hardcover. But also, that means it contains the handful of illustrations from it as well. So that makes it extra special among the Signets, and I think really one of the best Signets to have, because you get all of the fancy illustrations and title boxes from the US hardcover, plus it adds the property of a lady short story. Now here I have 2 copies of the original US hardcover. The reason why, this was the original copy I got from my grandmother's bookshelf, and so it's a little the worse for wear, has some tears in the dust jacket, and then here is a second copy I found years later that's in much better shape, but it's obviously the same book. Show you the spines. Of course, one is totally shot and the other's fine. And then the rear has that shot of Fleming from the later Signet paperbacks we're used to, but across the whole rear. And then there is a little bit of tinting on the top, this sort of red-orange. You can see there's that same material that appears in the Signet paperback. And there's the illustration, so you can see they do carry over. What's neat about this particular edition, when you take the dust jacket off, they also made another custom printed logo. So here the sniper rifle with the octopus tentacle is actually printed on the book itself in this nice dusky orange. Then the custom art on the spine. Now, of course, because Property of a Lady is not included here in the original printing or the UK printing or most printings, I had to get it another way the first time. So I found this mystery compilation. This is actually a volume 2 of the Treasury of Modern Mysteries. This is short stories from various famous authors. And of course, I noticed on the spine that Fleming was included, and then I picked it up in a antique store when I was a kid and happened to notice it had the Property of a Lady stories, and that's what's included here. So of course I immediately purchased this simply because it had Property of a Lady in it. So of course this has been on my Bond bookshelf ever since, and then eventually I was able to locate the Signet paperback. And then finally for Fleming, we have the 2 primary non-James Bond works that he composed during the Bond heyday. Of course, is the Diamond Smugglers and the Thrilling Cities collection. So Diamond Smugglers here is the original US paperback, very obviously trying to do the same design style as the Signet paperbacks, but of course it's printed by Dell, so it's slightly different dimensions and has green edged pages as opposed to the Signet red. But it's nice that they match, or they try to match so closely, but also it's obviously designed to be on a bookstore shelf or a paperback rack and just look like any of the other Signet James Bond novels, and to get people to buy this instead of one of those. Even the spine is pretty similar. And even the rear is very similar. Of course, green edge pages. Now we move on to Thrilling Cities. This is a Signet paperback, so it goes perfectly with a set of the Fleming novels. Show you the spine, which also matches. Then the rear. Red edge pages. Now, of course, originally these were designed for Fleming's column in the Sunday Times, and then it was compiled into book form. Now, the only problem with this is, of course, Fleming wrote the 007 in New York short story, which was tacked on to some editions of Thrilling Cities, but unfortunately is not here. So the 007 in New York story is the only bit of Fleming Bond material that I don't own in print form. But of course, I've read it many times, and now it's tacked on to most of the reprints of short story compilations. So I really will have to get one of those very soon, just to be, fully complete in print form. Well, that's it for this particular video. Again, this is just going over my various Fleming editions. I try to keep an eye out, and I always look in used bookshops for any particular editions that pop up. And I've been really lucky in the past year or two to find things like I never expected to find any of the Bantam reprints with the really stunning Frank McCarthy art on them, and now I have most of them. So I would like to try and find the last one I need, and to just complete that little set. That's a nice little bit of Fleming to collect. That's not particularly expensive, but you do get the thrill of trying to find those particular editions in good shape. I would like to complete my run of 60s US Signet paperbacks as well. I am missing one or two, and I would like to upgrade something because of condition on a few, just to have the entire Signet shelf. Then my next goal would probably be making sure to have UK text for all of the alternate British texts and spellings. Usually it was spellings that the American publishers would change to the Americanized version, so it's little bits of dialogue here and there, but not really major elements. The one that was the most changed, of course, would be Live and Let Die, which is why it's important to have. That's the one that's most important to have both U.S. and U.K. texts of. It's hard to believe that, I just started with these two books and always wondered, would I ever find any more and be able to read all of the Fleming novels? And now I pretty much reread the entire canon every year because, again, if you're a Bond fanatic, it's just what you do. I hope this has been informative, and please comment below with, your own thoughts on collecting the Bond novels, or what you may have collected over the years, or, do you get into the continuation books? Do you stay entirely in the realm of Fleming? What's your favorite editions to collect, or what do you aspire to try and find? And also, even if you're not into the literary Bond, or you've just thought about it over the years, if you like the films and you've just never gotten into the books, there's no time like the present. There are several series of Fleming reprints now that are pretty readily available. The last major one being done by Amazon with the black and white covers. I think you can still purchase those new, if I'm not mistaken. But they add such a wealth of background to the films, and some people prefer them to the films. Some people prefer the films. Some people like both, like myself. But you can't go wrong, and I do think Fleming was a literary genius. He does not get enough credit. His books weren't taken seriously as literature in his lifetime. Now, at least, there is more critical appreciation for them. But he is, without question, my favorite author, along with Raymond Chandler, who, of course, that's very fitting because Chandler was an enormous influence on Fleming. And when you read Chandler and you read Fleming, you can really see that. And the way that Philip Marlowe is essentially one of the major influences on the character of James Bond. But there's nothing else in the world quite like them. Fleming's wit and his sarcasm and his cynicism about life just comes through the pages vividly. And while they are a product of their times, and you do have to have proper historical context to understand certain things about them, I do think they are great works of literature, and it's about time that they be appreciated as such. So again, I hope this has been informative and enjoyable. Hopefully you got something out of me babbling on and on and on about dozens and dozens of copies of Fleming's Bond novels. And with that, thank you ever so much for watching, and stay tuned for the next volume in this series, where I will be tackling the first of the continuation novels, starting with Kingsley Amis and moving on into the John Gardner era.